everyone. I am your host, Robin Stoltman, for Healing for the Soul podcast, where every week I feature different guests to help you become the best version of yourself through different methods you may not have heard of or thought of. Today, I have my guest, Will Kesselman, on the show talking about child protection services. We all know my personal background and history, and if you don't, follow me and you'll learn more. And so let's get started. Thank you, Will, for being on my show. I really appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I treat every opportunity as if it's my first, so thank you. I'm really, really appreciative to be here.
Well, what is your specialty exactly?
All right. So, for over 14 years, I've been working for the government in a protective division where I go into situations and help usually women as well as children get out of traumatic situations, whether it's abuse, whether it's child abuse, whether it's domestic violence, um, anything that really involves trauma, or when someone's trying to take away another person's power. So, again, domestic violence or anything where the person's perpetrating something. So I will try and help the women and children get to a shelter or a domestic violence shelter or a safe location or safely go with family so that the person perpetrating whatever they're doing doesn't follow them, or maybe they know where they're going, but they don't know exactly how they're getting there. So it's done in a safe way. There's different ways that I do what I do. But then I took those skills because I've been seeing sort of patterns, people asking me questions again and again. And I'm like, wait a second, I can help more people. So I created a consulting and strategy company called Control and Power Strategy. And through that company, I help as many people as I can throughout the United States and sometimes internationally, Canada, UK, etc. In terms of situations, if they're being investigated by child protection or child welfare or CPI, depends on where you are and the acronym that they want to use, because there's a whole thousand of them, acronyms wise.
Yeah.
And so I help the family going through an investigation how to navigate it, right? Again, the families who I help have to be people who are taking care of their kids. I'm not trying to help someone who is in need of a service like child protective services. Um, Interesting. Someone's on the Facebook Live, by the way.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah. Anyway, um, so I'll help with that if they're being investigated by child protection in terms of how to handle it, what the protection investigator or agent or child welfare person or whatever they might say, they might be thinking, how they might react to certain things. And it's not to avoid things, it's just to make sure that the family gets the help that they need without things piling on, because oftentimes cooler heads can prevail, or you can catch more beans with honey than you can with vinegar. So
True.
it's the empowerment piece that really is what I'm all about, which is why my company is Control and Power Strategy, giving people back their power once they get the control. Because as I'm sure you know, with domestic violence, it's first the perpetrator, the domestic violence perpetrator, usually a guy, but not always, takes the first takes the control and the power, right? So
Mm-hmm.
first it's the power and the control, forgive me. Okay, for domestic violence, I'm trying to flip that, which is why I'm control and power strategy, not power and control strategy. Because the whole point is I'm trying to flip that script and not be in a traumatic situation, but to take your power back that was snatched inappropriate from those who are in those situations. So, um, that's part of what I do in terms of helping families, children, mothers, and it could be even bullying situations. It could be, again, I mentioned child protection. I mentioned
Mm-hmm.
domestic violence. It could be harassment or stalking situations. Um, it could also be going through divorce or separation. And while I'm not a lawyer, and I have to make sure I'm very clear with that, I do know, as I've been working with lawyers for the last 14 years on a very regular basis. So I do know um, some of the front end stuff before you get to a lawyer, how to best prepare for that. So there's that part of it too, because as we know, child welfare does often take things to court, and also in domestic violence situations, it obviously can go to court, or it can be a domestic violence situation being dragged through court through divorce. And so each of these things sort of intertwine and sort of play one on the other. And so for that reason, that I'm able to help in each of those, let's call them arenas or spaces or areas or whatever word you wish to use.
Well, that is helpful because, like I said, I've been through there. And it's one of those things that it just makes it makes their blood boil with how child protection treats people. And especially like how they do things, they assert a lot of control and manipulation over families.
Mhm.
That's what they do. And then people like myself are like, what the hell? We don't even see this coming.
Yeah.
Because, like, my case, long story short, is in Minnesota. My son, 4 days old, no proof, no court orders, nothing. They just come and take my son. And it's like, then you tell me why, when I moved, this is what I tell everybody. Tell me if there was truly a problem. Tell me why. When I moved to South Dakota, I've got 4 children. I still can have more, no problems.
Mhm.
And tell me why, even when I divorced my husband, because that was supposed to fix the problem according to the lawyers,
Mhm.
and tell me why do I have no problems here, but I had them all in Minnesota.
Okay, so it gets. I'm not going to say
I'm not getting
complicated.
like into our
Okay, fine.
situation too
I can
much.
answer that if you want me to. I mean,
Oh yeah,
I can
that
break
would
it
be
down.
good.
I can
That would
break
be
that
good
down.
because that'd be helpful.
So,
Yeah.
as you were speaking, actually, just before we went on air or live, if you will,
Yes.
so I had mentioned that child protection is because it's civil law, right? So child
Yes, it
protection,
is.
the laws are by the state. So each state has their own laws. Then you have the issue of the counties run their own child protection branch or division. So you could have laws applied in one way in one county in the same state and a different way in the same count in a different county but the same state. So what might be one county or state, in this case you mentioned Minnesota, which is
Yeah.
different from you mentioned as I'm sorry if you mentioned did you say South Dakota or North Dakota?
I'm in South Dakota.
Okay. So
And my
so
case happened in Alexandria, Minnesota,
okay. No,
which is
correct.
Douglas County.
Okay. So like I'm trying to get at so with
Mhm.
Minnesota, right? So they have one set of rules and then each county has to follow those laws or the case law changes how things go. Meaning for people to understand, case law is when you go to court and cases are won or lost, how those wins and losses happen and the rulings behind them. In other words, if a judge says
Mhm.
you have to do this, you don't do that. And it's because the case was presented in a certain way. So then it affects how a child welfare investigator or agent or whatever can do things because the case law now changes how the rules and the protocols and everything else happens. So you can have
Oh,
rules and
that makes
laws for
sense.
one county different
Mhm.
from a different county in the same state because one county may have more, let's call them civil servants, and the civil servant knows the ins and outs. So they argue things a different way in court. So the court rules a different way because the argument, it's by the argument, not by the case itself. The case matters, and the argument is also part of it. So you can have the same
True.
case in two different counties. If the argument is done differently, it can affect the ruling, and that ruling then affects the next case after, and the next case after, and the next case after. So you're going to have a difference in how things are done in different counties in the same state, but also different states in the same general area. Because again, even though a lot of the laws come from England, more or less,
Mhm.
I'm simplifying this. Um, at the same time, each state then had influences. Like, for example, Louisiana has more of a French influence, which is why the word advocate means lawyer in Louisiana, for example. Okay. So
Oh,
people,
did
yes,
not know that.
yeah. So people who use the word advocate and they say they're an advocate for domestic violence or whatever, if they're not
Mhm.
careful, they could be considered a fake lawyer and get themselves into big trouble, for example. So this
Wow.
is, yeah. And I give this example because it sort of shows just how nuanced, how meticulous or sort of not small but like precise things can really get one county to the other, one state to the other, even in the same region. So that's where things get interesting.
So
To
that's
me-
why my lawyer told me all I had to do was just move across the highway, because my house there's a highway line that divides between
Mhm.
Douglas County and Todd County. That explains why the lawyer said, well, all you had to do is move across the county to Todd and you would have been fine.
So that's not so simple because and this is why lawyers, they mean well because they know the laws,
Yep,
right? But they don't know the protocols and procedures and how it's applied on a child protective, child welfare level, right?
that makes
So
sense.
if something happens in one
Mhm,
county, the case stays in that county until a new investigation starts, even if the case is still active or the investigation or whatever part of the case is still active in the first county. If you move
mhm,
to a different county and in that new county another allegation, concern, whatever, is made, so you have two investigations in two different counties, the older, quote unquote, forgive me, the older county,
mhm.
that still goes on and they still have to either go take it to court or they have to have you plead guilty or not guilty for the civil charges or the civil stuff. But you still have the new county stuff. So the new county is going to say, hey, well, we look at things differently. So we're not going to say that you've done something wrong as a parent, abuse, neglect, whatever. But the
Mhm.
first county is still ongoing. So just changing county doesn't solve the problem because the first county still exists. The first county stuff is still there until they close everything and follow the laws and the rules. As long as it's active based on the first investigation, that that old county won't have new investigations because you don't live there anymore. And as long as the kids don't go
Hmm.
to school in that old county and they don't have any therapists in that old county or anything else going on in that old county, even though it's supposed to be based on where you now live, by the way, but let's assume that there's a way to maneuver,
Yep.
and sometimes they do maneuver and they shouldn't, but they can, or the therapist or the school or whoever calls it in innocently and gives the wrong info, so it becomes active again in the old or original county. So then you have an issue of things being active where they shouldn't be based on the rules, laws, and procedures that shouldn't apply to you or your children or whoever the you is anymore. So that's where things get, interesting is the wrong word, but interesting in the sense that it gets really precise and really nuanced, and you have to know the ins and outs. So just by moving to a different county doesn't solve the problem of having something active when you were in the original county. You have to first get all
That
that
makes
taken
sense.
care of and hope that nothing else new happens or comes up, even if it's false or misinformed. Because sometimes people see stuff and they don't know the whole story. They say, oh, well, it has to be whatever. It doesn't have to be whatever. It could be something else. But people often judge or assume or whatever. I'm not making light of people or whatever. Everyone has their own way of looking at things, and that's cool, right?
Well, yeah, we do. We all have our own perceptions of
Mm-hmm.
reality.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not knocking that at all. All I'm simply
Mhm.
saying is that sometimes someone says, well, this is what I'm seeing, so I'm calling in to be safe. And that's also from a good place. It doesn't mean that how it gets applied afterwards is good. It could be misdone, misinterpreted, misinformed, whatever. That's not on the person making the call, but it does have ripple effect. So there are all these
It
different
does.
nuances and stuff that go on. Not to get too intense or too tedious about this. I want to make sure everyone understands and I'm clear and each step is crystal clear, because it can get really interesting or really, no, let's use a different word. Let's use precise and let's use also tedious, to know what's going on. So,
Which that would make sense. So then who or what inspired you to start this consulting for people, like specifically child protection being unprofessional?
so what inspired me was is the constant questions. People would ask legitimate, well-meaning questions while I'm investigating, and they're like, "Okay, well, what about this and what about that?" And I was being asked similar, not the exact same question each time, but similar questions with similar themes, um, repeatedly, every day, every week, every month, whatever. I'm like, wait a second, I can help more people than just working for the government as an investigator. I can help people across the United States, for example.
Mhm.
And so, with the knowledge I have, because also a lot of my cases, I call them "Where's Waldo" cases, where they would hop around
Yes.
from county to county or state to state. Okay, and I'm actually like sort of I was known for it, where I had cases that were all over the place, right? So, um, I got to learn about how the procedures, protocols, and everything in child welfare is across the country. Not every single county, because there's a gazillion
Yeah,
counties,
there's a lot of them.
but enough to know the nuances and differences, but also know where there's a lot of commonality. There's a lot of things that are in common. And for that reason, I'm able to actually help people. And so I wanted to take the information that I was being asked as a question and give it to as many people as possible to help them, to help walk them through what's going on, how to handle someone knocking on your door. Do you have to open that door right away? Can you wait? Can you not wait? How do you assess that? And so on and so forth. Once that first knock on the door has passed, obviously at some point you have to let them into your home, or at least let them see your children. Depends on the county and the state. Going back to the whole conversation from before. Because the nuances matter in terms of the laws and procedures. And then what more does a person have to say or do? Do you have to answer the questions? Do you have to answer all the questions? Do you have to answer some of the questions? And that kind of stuff. So that really is a lot of the work with child welfare, with domestic violence, because again, it's all about power and control. It's either an investigator, someone who has power, and in situations where they misuse, because not all situations the investigator misuses. There
Yeah, not
are
all of them. There's,
correct.
yeah.
Well, there's a lot in different counties. There's less so in other counties. So it depends on the county and the state. Okay,
True.
that's the thing. So when someone says all child welfare, whatever, I'm like, hold on a second. Yes, there are issues. There's issues with every system. Okay, I don't care if it's non-legal, non-executive branch, meaning child welfare, police, whatever. There's issues with all types of stuff, even in business and everything else. But the point is, it's how to know how to sort of navigate it, how to sort of walk that line, or sail that boat, so to speak, or whatever, to know how to get through it. But still, also, if the person needs help, gets the help and doesn't get a kitchen sink thrown at them when it's not necessary. Sometimes it is necessary. And in that case, I don't knock child welfare. Child welfare is there to help. So is the police, so is other branches of the government. Sometimes things get so streamlined that if you don't fall within that narrow sort of if this, like a domino effect, if you're not in there, they're not sure how to handle it. So they might sort of throw you in there instead of being able to look outside of the box. So, that's part of it also. So I really try and help people, families, mothers, especially mothers and children, walk them through how to sort of handle it, navigate it, what to say, not to say, all those kinds of things. So, it came from people asking questions. And the honest truth is, if I'm the investigator and you're asking me questions, like, can you answer, like, I'm investigating someone and they're saying, well, can I answer this question? I mean, I answer truthfully, obviously, but there are people
Well,
who
yeah.
can easily say, well, no, you have to answer all my questions. And maybe you don't, right? Because if I'm the investigator and I'm telling you to answer my questions, like, that's a weird kind of thing, right? It's either conflict of interest or some other, word that you might want to throw
Yeah.
in there.
It's
So,
like, I know, like with my case, I know with the guardian ad litem, but the judge them let that be. And there was the stupidest thing I did, but I didn't know, like what you were just were talking about,
mhm,
for how they are unprofessional, is I didn't get to see my son for a month afterwards. I
mm,
didn't even have the first court hearing until a month later. And I'm like, what am I supposed to be guilty of? And they said, well, the lawyer that I had, the public pretender,
mhm,
told me that, well, because they, and that's considered neglect. And I'm like, okay. So then I'm like, okay, well, then I guess I am. And then that's like the whole domino effect you were speaking of.
yeah. So you were cutting out. They said what again? I missed that. I'm sorry.
Oh, they said that with my case for the court part of it,
Hmm.
that I was considered neglectful because I'm on disability.
That's
And that's where
interesting.
the lawyer told me that the public pretender said that they prove that. So the whole long story short of my
Hmm.
whole entire case, you'd have to
Hmm.
look up everything on it.
Hmm.
The whole thing of it is that between doctor reports and everything is that it's all fraudulent. And I know this because I can prove it. And so one of the things that I wanted to know, do you know like how many people actually believe that child protection is helping families correctly in a professional manner, and those that don't actually commit the fraud and the lies.
So that's like a three-part question, I think. Maybe it's two
Yeah,
parts.
sorry.
But anyhow, that's okay. So we'll take it one at a time. So
Mhm.
I don't know of a specific stat. I don't know if there is anyone that has a statistic on that. I do believe that not just like the whole thing about the county and whatever, that's nice. But
Mhm.
in terms of overall, I do think that most people think that child welfare is helpful. I think most people don't know the ins and outs of child welfare. That's a fair statement to say.
Yeah, it is
They
until they
think
get into
they
it.
think it's there to help, and a lot of times they do help. But like I said before, sometimes things sort of get misunderstood or whatever the case is. Because I believe people mean well. It doesn't mean everyone means well. There's always different situations for different situations or different people, whatever.
True.
Um, so here's a fun thing. I'm going to get to the answer
Mhm.
in a second, but here's a fun thing that ties into your question. There's
Okay.
actually a company, I forget if it's in Arizona or California. Their sole mission is to help child welfare agencies change their culture, their internal culture, how they
Mhm.
view cases, how they handle internal reviews of situations, because they're one of their let's say statements or premises or whatever word you want to use is that basically this company was created by a bunch of people who left child welfare in either California or Arizona, and they left because they saw the culture wasn't, and the mindset and how they viewed things and processed things, the protocols and everything else, wasn't always helping. For example, let's say there's something happens with a child, and then they have an internal
Yep.
review, and the review says, okay, well, you missed this. So then the new protocols are layered on top of the original protocols, and then another problem happens 5 or 10 years later. A child dies or whatever is, or something's missed. Sometimes things aren't missed. Sometimes there's too many layers of protocol that it slows down the child welfare investigator from actually doing anything. Okay, or doing things fast enough, right?
Yeah.
So each time there's a problem, and this is why this company exists, because each time there's a problem, there's a new layer of protocol. And sometimes it's, oh, well, we're just going to fire the person outright. Okay. And so speaking in general, there's certain things I can and cannot say, but speaking in general, this company um, is trying to help change things so that how the child welfare agency, whether it's by the county or whether it's a state run, because that also can get interesting. And here's how it happens. Um, the This company helps each of these welfare agencies see how they view their own employees and how they treat them, see how they view the situations, the cases, the investigations, and how it all meshes and all that kind of stuff. So back to your question about how people view child welfare, I think in general people view it appropriately, and that it is helpful, and in general it is helpful. The issue becomes the, let's call them few cases, and I don't mean few in number, I mean few in percentage. Um, those few cases, unfortunately, are cases that may not be within what they're used to seeing, and like, well, we don't know how to handle it. In your case, I'm gonna make a few assumptions, and if I'm wrong, let me know.
Yep, I
My
will.
first assumption is that because of whatever disability that they claimed, they're then saying that you can't care for your child because it prevents you from caring for your child. In other words, let's say, for example, a parent has to feed their
Yeah,
child
they
medication.
did.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one thing that they did,
Okay.
and that's why I had to do a parental assessment. I mean,
Mm,
like, they went as far as
yep.
putting me into a group home.
Wow.
That's what this
Wow.
county did, and
Wow.
this is the part that ticks me off.
Wow.
Now I understand through what you were saying, all the layers of things that they have to go through, because
Mm,
when I was a kid, I was being sexually abused
I'm
for
sorry to hear
10
that.
years. I have a police report from the exact same county that stole my son.
Mm,
I have all these proof and nobody did anything. So here I am when I have my child and I'm like, what the hell? You guys didn't do anything when I was a kid. I have police reports. I also
Mm,
have um, stuff, from them paying me to take care of my sister's kids
mm,
before my kid was born. And it's
mhm,
like, so yeah, I understand that now with what you were saying about like how the layers go.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
But yeah, then they sit there and blame my brain injury. And I'm like, seriously? So they put me in a group home. They put me in
So
it's
that's what it is.
called foster care. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were trying to find something wrong. I went through parental assessments. So they eventually, what they did to help take my son away permanently on the whole thing was
Mhm,
that they hired Dina McMahon, who is purposely hired by the county to say that my son was not bonding to me. Well,
mm,
they changed his name without me knowing what they were
mm,
calling him. And it's like, well, then of course they're not gonna, I'm calling him Miracle, they're calling him MJ. And it's like, the kid ain't gonna come. It's like a dog,
yeah.
You call a dog by a different name when you first get them, they're not gonna know their name. So
It
yeah,
actually
it
becomes
all
negative.
makes sense. But the good thing is that it's like I have all of this proof of all the stuff they did not do
Mhm,
correctly. And that's why I tell people, I'm like, if there was an issue, stop and think about it. Minnesota is very liberal. They're very much social services has immunity. They have 100% absolute immunity there.
mhm.
Now, if you would apply that to South Dakota, it would not happen because South Dakota is black and white. And I mean black and white. There is no gray here. I'm serious on that.
I
No
don't know. I
gray.
don't know South Dakota very well, so I don't want to comment on that. But I will say that even in most states and most counties, child welfare has immunity, just like law enforcement has immunity in most situations. Um, but that isn't the kicker. The kicker is if the lawyer is a good lawyer, they'll get their own experts to negate and counteract whatever expert the state, the county, whoever is saying whatever. Okay. So that in court, it's expert one versus expert two, and they're both sort of conflicting with each other. So then it's who do I believe? Because it goes by the judge. There's no
True.
jury, there's no whatever. It's a judge, one judge who makes a decision. So
Hmm.
then you bring in facts. Now, again, a good lawyer or a public defender, if they give enough time, which means that they don't sleep because they are often overwhelmed with the amount of cases that they have, which is unfortunate but true and sad but true.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
if they were to guide their clients and say, no, no, you need this paperwork and that paperwork, which is part of what I do. When people ask me to help them, to
Hmm.
guide them, to consult for them or give them a strategy, it's not just telling them what the rules and protocols and everything is. It's also how to best prepare before whatever the situation is, whether it's, excuse me, whether it's a elevated risk conference or a child safety conference, or whether it's a service plan conference, because there's different words in different places. Okay,
Yeah.
um, but the bottom line is there's a way to prepare for these things. There's a way to prepare even before they enter your home that people should be doing on a regular basis. Like people have like a plan. If there's a fire, I'm going to run to this place,
Yeah.
or I have insurance for my car. People should be having a plan. It's for me, I claim it as a holistic thing where just like you might have tea if you're sick or soup if you're sick or whatever, you
True.
or you do yoga meditation to be in a better, physical mood or state or have better health. The same thing
Hmm.
with mental health in terms of having a plan before it happens. So what we have with that in terms of the plan is to tell or talk to three friends and say, look, if I'm ever stuck where child welfare, the police, whoever is at my door, will you come over and vouch? Or if you're able to schedule something with child welfare, that they hopefully are in the home with you when child welfare comes to the house. Because at least someone's there as a witness who can then testify in court on the parents, the mother's behalf, saying, no, 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 no. What this child welfare investigator is saying, it didn't happen. Because it's not just the parent against a government employer or agent or whatever, it's two people now who are there. And a lot of states, there are ways to ask with different wordings. I'm not going to get into the specifics. I think it's like too tedious and
Yeah.
whatever. But there's a way to say, hey, I want to record this. And a lot of counties and states, they say, no, I can't do that. And they'll walk out. Some places or a lot of places, they'll allow it or allow it in a certain way, or you have to sign a waiver form. It gets interesting, okay, in terms of the words and whatever. But bottom line is there are some places where you can actually do a recording of it, so it holds everyone accountable, even the person themselves, because the investigator is allowed to say, hey, you have a recording, let's play the recording back. And you can hear it for yourself that you're admitting or not admitting, or you did or didn't say, or whatever the situation is. Okay. So there's that. There's different ways to prepare. And those are the two key ones is, again, speaking to people so they know to be there, or they can write something out on paper that a lawyer can then have it, or you can have it notarized. The lawyer can have it as a legal document or an affidavit, depends on which county or state you're in and everything else. So there's a whole bunch of ways that a person can protect, a woman, a mother can protect herself and her children from any situation, well, not any, from most situations that can be manipulated or altered or misunderstood instead of for what it really is. So, hopefully your viewers, listeners, subscribers, are able to benefit from that little major piece of advice.
Yeah, I wish I would have had known that ahead of
Yeah,
time. All
yeah.
I knew is that when I was drugged up at the hospital and they came right after I had my C-section, because long story short, I got called. The only reason why I got called in was because my husband's therapist that did sexual harassment on me. That's a whole other ball game
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
Took and called in the false report. So I'm like, whatever. So when I saw them recording me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to record you guys because
Yeah.
I just had gotten another dose of Percocet or whatever
Mm-hmm.
they gave me at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, that's the only reason why I knew to record. So I knew we could record because that's what I did the entire time. I'm like, you guys you guys don't record. I know you guys lie, so I'm just going to record. So that does help. But I didn't know about I didn't stop and think about the other person, that having another person
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there
Mm-hmm.
could potentially help. I just
Yeah.
knew like the recording part.
So there's an issue with recording, right? There's some states
Mm-hmm.
where you need the other person's consent. And in some other states and counties, you need a government agent's consent, even if a layperson or a bystander or whoever, you don't need the consent and that kind of stuff. But with a government agent, sometimes you do. So by
Did not
recording
know
it,
that.
I'm not saying you should or shouldn't have. All I'm simply
Mm-hmm.
saying is by recording it and not telling them, it could have potentially led to more problems, not less, even though all you're trying to do is defend yourself. And I'm not saying, you weren't, or it's nefarious, or you're trying to cause issues. That's not what I'm saying at all. But a person needs to know or have someone guide them on what to do, how to do it, because things that you think are innocent can backfire.
True.
For example, people, ask, I would say ask, or if let's say they're in a shelter and they ask a friend or someone who they met
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 weeks ago, or even a couple of months ago, and they don't know them very well. And they say, hey, can you watch my kid for the night? Because maybe they have to go do a double shift or whatever the case is. And that person may have child welfare history, or that person may have drug issues or mental health issues. And then something happens. Well, yeah, that person who thought they could trust that other woman or that other man or wherever
Mm-hmm.
watching their kids, now they get a case because they thought they could trust someone. It's the same thing with thinking you can do certain things that you think are innocent. Think, oh, okay, it should be fine. I'm not saying you have to sort of hire someone each time or ask someone each time, but it is important to find out the information of whatever it is that you're doing or have to know about before you do whatever you're doing. Because you don't want to get caught in, well, I thought I could do this, and now it backfires in your face 10 times worse. That's like not, it's so bad. It's so not worth it. So,
Yeah, that's still good to know though, because to me, I'm just like, yeah, I never would have stopped and thought about that. So that is another tip for the audience. Go and check your state laws and check with
it's
check
important to
with
learn those
you for
things.
sure.
Absolutely.
Because
They're very important to
I
learn those things.
I wish I would have known you when I was going through my
Mm.
case. Because I'm like, you could have saved us a lot of fees. You could have saved us a
Oh, yeah.
lot of headache. Because
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
I can, the same mindset that got me into that can pull me out of it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where I'm at now,
Mm-hmm.
is that
Mm-hmm.
focus on what can I do going forward
Yep.
to help others. So that's like the beautiful part of the mess.
I hear that.
Beauty from the ashes.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the work that I do, and why
Hmm.
people sort of see why they should sort of hire me or allow me to consult for them, or give them a strategy is because it's almost like the sort of cliched example that's like overused at this point in terms of the bridge, right? You want to get from one side of the bridge to the other side of the bridge in the quickest, easiest, less painful, and less expensive way possible, right?
Yes.
So even though they say, well, why should I pay you in a lawyer? Why should I this, that, or a third or whatever, or hire a bunch of people? Well, because I'm going to help you spend less time with a lawyer so you avoid paying a lawyer a whole bunch of fees. I'm going to help you save at least one court visit because you're so well prepared that it doesn't let things drag on by at least one, if not more, court appearances. And every court appearance costs money with a lawyer. It costs your time. Maybe you have to like not get paid from work. So those things add up. Every phone
It
call,
does.
email, whatever to a lawyer adds up. Every time you have to go make copies or whatever, there's a way to ask for medical records that usually, but not always, lets you get it for cheap or free, as opposed to sometimes they say no, you have to pay per page, right? And there's
Hmm.
also a way to get certain pages, not pay for every page, but the most important pages, right? So there's different ways to handle different things. So you sort of shorten the time going from where you are, whoever whoever's listening, or whoever which mother is listening, or whatever, not necessarily you, Miss Stolman, but whoever you, the
Well, yeah,
person
you're
is,
fine.
getting to the next point, the later point, across the bridge, that next bank, to get to a much better spot quicker, easier, faster, with less headaches. Because the headaches really it can affect someone. As I'm sure you know, you were frustrated, probably.
Hmm.
You were like, this doesn't make sense. Why are they doing this to me? I'm a good mother. I'm trying. I'm this. I'm that. Whatever. This
Yeah,
doesn't
because
make
I
sense.
passed all of their psychological tests.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had doctors galore
Yeah.
back me up. I did
Yeah.
parenting bullshit classes. Sorry, I'm just saying. Did a lot of that stuff. And it's like, and that's why they finally had to hire her, to say that their bond wasn't there. And it's like, she has a proven track record for taking families out and separating them.
A lot of counties and states have a let's call them an expert that they hire to prove whatever case they have in court. Some counties and states don't do that. A number of them do.
Mhm.
So it's sad or hurtful from my perspective to hear that they hired someone who then went against everything that you were proving with facts, proving with sort of data. You went and did the class, you went and did this and did that and
Mhm.
answered their questions and followed what they're telling you to do. And yet they're trying to get yet one more person to sort of tip the scales back in their favor when maybe they were seeing that they shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. That to me is, not appropriate. And,
That's why
going to
on
the
the
counties.
adoption, that's
Yeah.
why on the adoption part, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's why they said on the end of it that the only reason why I had to give my son up was just because of the time. And I'm like,
Time?
seriously? Yeah,
What
I
time?
can I can send that to you. Because of
Holy
the
bananas. What? The
time.
time?
Hmm. Yeah,
That's
I can send that to you. And just like that's why they
ugh.
said what they said, I can send that to you
So
on
so
that.
look, so there is a federal law that Bill Clinton
Mhm.
helped enact. I don't remember if it was 97 or 93. I get the numbers wrong
Mhm.
sometimes. It's the Safe Families Act, okay?
Yes, that's the one
Where
that people are like, no, that was a bad thing. But I don't know.
well, so it was made for a reason, and
Hmm.
the reason that it was done is actually a good reason because things were getting dragged through court for years. Final
Oh,
adoptions couldn't
okay.
happen for years. Children in foster care couldn't get out of foster care for years. Unfortunately, certain states, certain counties have flipped it and said, "Oh well, the child's been in foster care for the most recent 15 consecutive months out of the last 22 months. So in English, what that means is a year and a quarter, the most recent year and a quarter out of the last almost 2 years, give or take some math.
Mhm.
Okay. And so they're saying, well, the child's been in care for a year and a quarter. Now we have to finalize the papers. And while in a lot of situations it's helpful because the child needs stability, from what you're telling me, I don't know the whole case
Yeah.
in and out. From what you're telling me, they were flipping it against you for that reason, and it is a federal law. So it's not as if they're just quoting like nonsense. Unfortunately, it's a law, so they're quoting you a law.
Yeah.
But
And that's what they did too.
yeah, it just sounds like they were using it in this way against you when they shouldn't have. So that's really heartbreaking in a lot of ways. I'm sorry to
Yeah.
hear that. I
And
really am sorry to hear that.
well, that's why I started what I started after the hell. And
Yeah,
that's like I'm just like that's why I keep thinking the same mindset that got me in
yeah,
can get me out of it
that's
and
right.
bring and track him back.
Hmm.
So that's
Absolutely.
like I said, there's beauty from the ashes. So with everything that you know, I've really enjoyed our talk a lot. So what is the best way to contact you with the time zone? Because I know a lot of connections after my ordeal with Minnesota. I must have had over 25 different people like
Mhm,
contact me.
mhm.
And so what's the best way for people to get in contact with you for you to help them?
So I always make the joke that I don't sleep. So I usually sleep somewhere in the range of I don't know. Let's say I'm on the East Coast for now. I'm based in the East Coast, but I do travel for work as well. So even let's say noon to 4 or 5 or 6 in the afternoon, I may be sleeping. I may sleep earlier or later. But the point is, most people can call me even at midnight their time, whatever time they're in, whether it's UK, Canada, West Coast, Minnesota, Mountain Time, Central Time, whatever. It doesn't really matter. If I don't
Mhm.
pick up, I will call you back within 6 or 8 hours, more or less. Um, so the best way to reach me is through the website, but there's other stuff that I'm going to give as well. So the website is controlempowerstrategy.com. You can also find the Twitter and Instagram handles as small c underscore small p underscore strategy, because control and power strategy for short is CP strategy. So C underscore P underscore strategy for both Twitter and Instagram. You can also find the actual page, a separate page on Facebook as Control and Power Strategy. Um, the hashtags will find me too. I've been using hashtags for a while now. You can find me as Will Kesselman on Facebook. I get people DMing me all over the place. You can call me. I have different numbers from different parts of the country. But without getting too deep in terms of this number and that number, whatever, the best way
Yep.
is online on some way, and I will respond pretty quickly. And I'm here to help and serve, and hopefully I can help guide as many people as possible. So thank you for having me. I properly appreciate this. Seriously.
Yeah, I do too. I very, very much, very much. And then didn't want to try to make it all about me either, but I'm just like, I've been there. I've done that. I
Mhm.
can relate. So it's like help as many people as we can
Correct. I
because
mean,
when
part of
we
it.
change things, that's helps. That's
Oh
a
yeah,
ripple of.
and by you giving some of your story, I'm able to sort of respond, like almost like a question and answer, where it
Mhm.
shows people how I can help and where I can guide, and it really opens people's eyes and say, "Oh, wait a second, yeah, I have that issue, or yeah, this is affecting me, or whatever the case is, and I am truly properly able to help." And it's not just, "Well, I'm not sure," "Well, I don't know," because there's that fear factor, and we're out of time. A lot of my work isn't just with the actual facts; it's also with the mindset, it's the fear, it's viewing things and how to get past certain mind blocks and whatever. But you know
And I've
it,
learned to overcome that. Oh, I definitely have learned how to overcome that every when I first had my son after my ordeal in Minnesota and I gave birth to him here. And I was just like, I was so scared at the hospital. I had a, it's hard to say, but
mhm,
I had a goodbye bag because I wasn't sure if
mhm,
they're going to take my son to
mhm,
that.
mhm.
So yeah, I've learned how to move past it
Yeah.
through the
Oh
work
yeah.
that I do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's not easy. It's traumatic. It's
Mm-mm.
hard. It's a lot of things.
Wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Absolutely not.
But I thank you so much, Will, for being a guest. I really extremely appreciate it
Thank
very,
you for
very
having me.
much.
Thank you.
So if anybody wants to get a hold of Will, you know how to be able to get a hold of him. He's gave plenty of information, and I greatly appreciate Will's time and energy for being here. And thank you for your time and energy for tuning in to Healing for the Soul podcast.